So welcome to the first of hopefully many wrestling podcasts on this channel. Now, I've been talking about wrestling on YouTube for over 6 years now, so it's actually been quite a while. Now, I've been doing it on and off, was never really consistently posting videos nonstop for the past 6 years, but I'm going to try to change that now. I'm going to try to be more active on this channel. But to kick off the first episode of the Pro Wrestling Prick podcast, I thought that nothing would be more fitting to talk about on my first ever podcast, and I guess you could call the reboot of this channel. It would be appropriate to talk about how I got into wrestling in the first place. So I've been a wrestling fan for 8 years now, which actually means that I didn't really get into wrestling until much later in my life, at least compared to other podcasters, other wrestling commentating personalities on YouTube. Because I'm 19 years old right now, so 8 years ago I would have been 11 years old, and most of the people that I know, either in real life or on the internet, that are into wrestling, the first time they watched wrestling, they were very, very, very young children. And most of them would tell you stories about their grandparents or their parents or anybody in their family getting them into wrestling, but that wasn't the case for me, and that's why I didn't get into wrestling much sooner in my life, because nobody in my family ever gave a shit about wrestling. As a matter of fact, once my family found out that I was watching wrestling, they thought it was funny. They always made fun of me for doing it. But let me tell you guys how I got into wrestling. It's actually very interesting. So there are two people that actually got me into wrestling. The first being my younger cousin. So I guess you could say that one of my family members did actually get me into wrestling. But the other one would be my best friend at the time, who actually still is my best friend. But this is back in elementary school, back in like 5th grade. And they were all talking about SmackDown vs. Raw, the new SmackDown vs. Raw game, and how great it is. And obviously, since my most successful channel on YouTube is my gaming channel, you guys would know that I'm a pretty serious gamer. I like video games. I'm very much into gaming. So when I heard about SmackDown vs. Raw, how it's like a wrestling game or like a fighting game or whatever, I was immediately interested in getting it. So when me and my cousin went to the store one day, she convinced me to get SmackDown vs. Raw. She wanted me to get 2009. 2009 was the newest game at the time, but for some reason at Walmart it was not in stock. But 2008 was, so I decided, you know what? What's going to be the big difference? One's 2008, one's 2009. It really won't be a big deal if I get 2008 and don't get 2009. It's just a year difference. I eventually did get 2009 a few months later, and eventually I got 2010, and then 2011. It became a yearly tradition because I absolutely fell in love with the wrestling games. I had so much fun. I remember the first match I played with my cousin was, I was The Undertaker, and she was John Cena, because John Cena was her favorite wrestler. I don't know why I picked Undertaker specifically, probably because he was scary looking and he looked cool, so I decided to pick him. I didn't know who The Undertaker was. I knew who John Cena was because I remember back when he first won the WWE title, everyone was carrying around those spinner belts in summer camp. Like, they all carried around a spinner belt. And, you know, back then I didn't know what the hell that was until I actually started getting into wrestling. I'm like, wait, that was from John Cena in WWE. And I remember them all saying, "You can't see me, you can't see me." I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I didn't really know anything about wrestling. But really, it was the SmackDown vs. Raw video games that got me into wrestling in the first place. I didn't watch the actual show immediately, but what I do remember is that when I watched the TV show for the first time, it was Monday Night Raw, and I'm like, wow, this is so much different than the video game. And it was because SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 took place when WWE wasn't PG. So obviously, when I played the story mode, what was it called? It was called 24/7 mode, the campaign for SmackDown vs. Raw 2008, and also the GM mode and all the other story modes that they had. Like, the way that the product was presented was so different. I remember, I'm like, wow, this is so different. But that didn't turn me away from wrestling. I actually wound up watching it weekly. As soon as I watched the first episode of Raw, I remember the first time I turned on Raw, I remember it was on the USA Network, and it was the very, very, very last 5 minutes of Raw. I think the main event was like John Cena versus Big Show or something like that. This is when Jericho was a tag team, and John Cena, I believe, had the WWE title. This is like a month or two before he dropped it to Sheamus. Oh, I remember how much I absolutely hated Sheamus. as a kid. I was so upset when he lost it to John Cena. I was like, no, Sheamus is the WWE champion. But yeah, back then they pretty much booked him as the Irish Brock Lesnar. And he just basically destroyed all of my favorite wrestlers. He destroyed Randy Orton. He destroyed John Cena. He destroyed Triple H. But yeah, because of how much I fell in love with those video games, how much fun those video games were, it actually got me into the real product. I watched SmackDown every week, and I watched part of Raw every week. Couldn't watch the whole thing because back then my bedtime was like 10 o'clock, and Raw was still on the air by that time. But yeah, if it weren't for those video games, I don't think I ever would have become a wrestling fan and would still at least periodically watch it here and there to this day. And I actually remember how the first match I played ended. I found out that I could pick up the steel steps, so I dragged the steel steps into the ring. I hit John Cena in the head with the steel steps as The Undertaker and got DQ'd. I'm like, what the hell is a DQ? All I gotta say is that back then was fucking awesome. 2009 was amazing. Despite the fact that I was faced with many hardships during that time, it was when my grandmother died, 2009. It made me and my cousin even closer, and I got into wrestling. I got into other stuff. It was a pretty good time. I really enjoyed my life back then, despite losing so much.